Welcome, everyone. It's always exciting, this moment, when you trickle in. And as always, let's begin with a deep collective breath. One really exciting thing about this session is that we had almost twice as many people register as we have in the past several months. And that means that there may be quite a few people in this space that are new to centering justice. So I was taking a moment to think about how to introduce centering justice to you before we dive in. And I was thinking back to a conversation with my colleague Yodit just a few weeks ago, where Yodit said something that really expanded my sense of what centering justice is. What Yodit said is that centering justice is a space where we catalyze systems change by showing people what's possible. And for me, that really reached deeply into my experience of centering justice and being in the presence of the amazing leaders of color that we've had share their stories and experiences every month. And for me, that experience has really opened me to what's possible. And so I just wanted to let you know that that's the space you've walked into today. And with that, I will turn things over to Yodit to ground us in the theme for this conversation and also introduce our three speakers for today.
Thanks, Ananya. Welcome, everyone. What a special session this is. And we are and continue to hold this space for centering justice to imagine what is possible. It's a space of radical imagination. It's a space for us to center and uplift the voices of Black, Indigenous, Latinx, Asian, and other people of color who we need right now as we shape and remake the world together. And in the spirit, Ananya, of what you said about this being a place for what's possible, today I'm thinking about how important it is for us to name what's been erased. Whether that is this week challenging the importance of educating our children about our country's origin story, or in more recent months, naming the way that the diversity of our identities have been erased, or even today in the spirit of Cinco de Mayo, expanding the story of independence beyond what gets distilled down and becomes commodified. Today, when we're going to explore what it means to unbuild racism. And it brings me to thinking about when we, a few years ago, launched our Champions for Change program, which is a fellowship for leaders of color and white leaders who are interested in working to dismantle systems of oppression at the individual and interpersonal level, but also across our community. For those who are unfamiliar, Washtenaw County is the third wealthiest county in the state. 30% of the people who live here are non-white, 12% are Black, and of that 12% of Black folks, 60% of them are living at or near poverty, and the majority of them concentrated on the east side of the county. And so when I was planning that program, I asked our team if part of it could be to take our leaders of color to the historic Idlewild community. Idlewild is known as a Black Eden, started over 112 years ago during segregation, it was where not only Black elites, but where musicians and Black folks gathered in this beautiful 3,000 acre parcels of property. And celebration and joy and living and love was happening there. And I wanted our fellows to see that, especially those who are rooted in Washtenaw County, where, because of the statistics I showed you, we are segregated by race as well here. And similarly, after we took the fellows to Idlewild, we took the entire fellowship on a journey through Washtenaw County. We did this in partnership with the African American Historical and Cultural Museum and local historians and longtime residents to uplift the history of Black organizing and its erasure. A big part of that for me is that the physical building that new occupies, the new center up on Main Street, actually buttresses a historically Black neighborhood, and dating all the way back to the 1800s. And yet gentrification and changes in our community that started many, many moons ago have now, that community is no longer majority Black. And I'm mindful of that as a citizen in the community, as a resident in the neighborhood, of that erasure. I would say on a personal level, and this might seem like a little thing, but I know a lot of us wanted to buy Black Lives Matter t-shirts last year to express our solidarity, and in my case, our belief that Black Lives Matter. And there's nowhere in this county where I can buy a Black Lives Matter t-shirt off the shelf. And that bothers me. There's also an African American History Museum that in large part is still a concept and not a place here, even though Black folks have played a significant role in the centuries that we've been here in the shaping of this community. And so I've been thinking about, where can I go? Where are the places and spaces, and how can I use our history of managing social purpose real estate to make a place and a space where our beautiful mosaic of identities in this community feel a deep sense of belonging. And so our guests here today are thought partners with me on this, and real partners. I'm thinking of Linette Lao, who will speak. Linette is the founder of Invisible Engines, and about a year ago, I hired her when I wanted our website to reflect our work, our mission, our vision. And wow, y'all, she introduced me to Trey Seals, who is one of the only Black typographers. I never thought about who made the Arial font until Linette introduced me to Trey Seals. Trey created the Martin font, which honors Dr. King and the sanitation strike. And so if you visit our website at new.org, you'll see that font as the anchoring font of our website, in homage to Dr. King, but also in an expression of our desire to be in solidarity with breakthrough pioneers like Trey. And then because of our work, in our Champions for Change Fellowship, one of our participants, Lisa Borgstorff, who was a part of our White Leaders cohort, reached out to me a few months ago and was like, hey, I work at the UMVM Museum of Modern Art. And it occurred to, in my mind, I was like, yeah. And we are confronting our role in unbuilding and undoing racism in Washtenaw County. And we have this exhibition, Unsettling Histories, led by Ozi Uduma, who you're going to meet. And I said to Lisa, the museum has never felt like home to me until she shared Ozi's work. And when Lisa shared Uma's commitment to anti-racism and some of the things that they were doing, and it really meant something to me that they acknowledged the role of this institution in homogenizing what art and what artistry looks like here. And so I'm excited that Ozi is going to share with us today. And finally, maybe you're like me, where you fangirl a little bit on our third guest, Deanna VanBuren. Someone sent me her TED Talk about how she was and is unbuilding racism and dismantling systems of mass incarceration. And you may have seen that the city of Atlanta hired Deanna to work on the Atlanta Juvenile Justice Center and to restore it to a place of restorative and transformative justice. I don't think children should be in jail. I don't think anyone should be in jail or prison. I think we need, in our world making, to reimagine what safety and accountability and responsibility look like. And so after I met Deanna, I actually hired her and her team at Designing Justice and Designing Space to help me think about how the new center in Ann Arbor and possibly other spaces that we might activate can also be a part in transforming justice here. So that's why we're here, y'all, because I am deeply passionate about the idea of unbuilding racism right here in Washtenaw County and really all over our nation and our world. And so with that, I'm going to turn it back to Ananya, and just so excited to see all of y'all here and to share a little bit of a riff on centering justice. It's not going to be purely conversational today. It'll be some presentations and some conversation. And let's get it going, Ananya.
Thank you, Yodit. So we always want to invite our speakers to bring their whole selves into this space. And so in that spirit, we'll just begin by asking each of you to share a little bit about the communities and identities that you are drawing upon as you join this conversation today. And let's begin with Ozi.
Hi, everyone. My name is Ozi Uduma. I, as Yodit said, and I work at UMA as the Assistant Curator of Global Contemporary Arts. And when I think about some of the identities that I bring to this conversation, I identify as a Black person. I identify as a Detroiter, specifically who grew up in the 90s and early 2000s of Detroit, which is a very different history from what we see today of Detroit. I am second generation American of Nigerian ancestry. I'm Igbo. Yeah, so those are some of the identities that I think about.
Thank you so much, Ozi. How about you, Linette?
Hi, my name is Linette Lao, and I have a lot of different passions and loves, which translates into a lot of different jobs in communities, and they're rarely all in one place. There's not always much overlap, so I'm bringing them all here with me today. So I'm channeling the poets and the designers and the teachers who love to learn.
Thank you, Linette. And Deanna, how about you?
Hi, good morning, everybody. Good morning from me, I should say. I'm on the West Coast. So interesting because I've spent so much of my life trying to release identity, but there are some that, I hold in my life as a Black woman. I'm an architect. I'm a global citizen. That's something that I really see myself as. And while my family are descendants of enslaved people on this land, I'm more than that history, and I just hold that. And I'll share a little bit more when I present some of our work.
Thank you, Deanna. And you've already expanded me by sharing that you've been trying to release identity. So thank you for that. And actually, before we transition into the core conversation, I want to acknowledge that the title of this session, Unbuilding Racism, at least I first heard of it through Deanna and your team. Would you like to share a little bit about how that phrase emerged?
We were in conversation after the murder of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor, and wanting to help people understand where our work tied into what was happening. And identities, and we're like, well, how do we phrase this? And we're like, well, what if we say we're unbuilding it, right? We're taking it down. And so that became a cry for us as that movement began.
Thank you, Deanna. Yeah, and you'd said something really poignant in our planning about how unbuilding is useful sometimes, and then it's really the building that's the real work. So thank you for introducing us to this conversation by sharing that. And so just to transition us into the core conversation for today, one little piece of feedback from a Centering Justice participant that really stuck with me was that for her, it's really the personal stories in this space that have moved her to move differently in the world. And so I was really thinking about that in our planning conversations, and it became sort of a theme with our speakers for this session, that we really wanted to invite them to share their work and to be rooted in their personal stories as they are sharing. So what we've asked is for each of our speakers to offer a visual presentation of their space and their work. And with that, to really hold this question of how your personal experiences have moved you to unbuild racism. So we're going to transition into presentations from each of our speakers that are really rooted in that question. And we will weave some conversation in. So let's dive in, and let's begin with Ozi.
So I'm going to share my screen. So I've been thinking about this question around how our personal work relates to our personal narratives relate to our work. And I've had a lot of conversations recently to think about the history of museums and my type of work in relation to the larger theme of my life so far. And so to begin, I want us to start here. So my story begins with place. And on this slide is a colored postcard depicting an elevated view of Woodward Avenue, facing north, I should say. And in this postcard, we see the Detroit Public Library. We see the DIA, and we see Park Sheldon in the background. And the postcard was created in 1935, and it's currently in the Detroit Historical Center's archives. So as I said in my intro, I was born and raised, or I identify as a Detroiter. I was born and raised in Detroit, where I still live. And I grew up in what everyone now kind of refers to as Midtown Detroit, although I did not grow up referring that to Midtown. I call it Cass Corridor. I called it the Wayne State area. I called it the Cultural Center, but never Midtown. So that's a very new language for me. But the museums along Woodward, Warren, and Kirby Street became extra classrooms for my teachers as they worked to link classroom studies with museum holdings and exhibitions. My parents also used these spaces to keep my brother and I busy on the weekends and long holidays. And my love of museums grew as I became a student docent at what is now called the Michigan Science Center, but I grew up knowing it as the Detroit Science Center during my sophomore year of high school. And then I spent my last month of high school working at the Children's Museum when they moved to their building on 2nd Avenue, which was formerly on Kirby Street. But my love of museums grew from a larger longing of cultural connection. So the picture that you see here was taken in December of 2018, I think on Christmas Day, if I'm not mistaken. And this is not even a quarter of my family. I come from a very, very large family. So I think this is only just a small fraction of that. And I was 25, 26 when this picture was taken. This was my first time back in Nigeria since I was 2. And so I grew up in a very large Igbo community in Michigan, but I didn't go back to Nigeria until 2018. And so outside of these community interactions in Michigan, my identity of being Nigerian was shaped by arts and culture, by music and art that I was exposed to from my parents and my friends, and also the art and artifacts and cultural holdings that are in museums across the country and the world. And I should say that there are larger conversations happening right now to talk about the fact that the majority of cultural artifacts from countries like Nigeria, Ghana, Liberia, Ethiopia are largely held outside of these countries in institutions in the US, the UK, all across Western Europe and in Canada. And I should say that UMA is currently leading or will premiere an exhibition on issues of restitution and repatriation of African art objects starting in the fall. So when it's safe for us to open our doors to visitors, I do recommend that you all come and visit and see the exhibition. So how does this relate to my current work as an assistant curator? So museums display things, arts, artifacts, and specimens, and we do this mostly in service of teaching facts, revealing new ideas, or driving emotion or empathy. And the things help museums to tell stories. And they traditionally have, and we as museums have traditionally portrayed ourselves as repositories of knowledge and of history. The work you see in front of you is actually from UMA's collection, and this is a portrait of Sir Foster Cunliffe III of Liverpool. The portrait created by the English painter John Hoppener is an example of the types of works people commonly see in fine art museums. Very grand portraits that speak to long-standing genre conventions and illuminate aesthetic beauty of the times in which the painting existed in. But until recently, histories and stories were presented as objective, factual, and disembodied. So we only heard from the institution's voice and not so much the community's voice. And museums are at times limited by the stories that they can tell and can tell well by the parameters of their own collection. So additionally, we tend to tell stories that we know, and therefore we fail to tell stories that reveal hidden histories that are a little bit darker, and also histories of marginalized peoples. In the last couple of months, I've had conversations with staff and students around the university and outside of the university, so like Yodit, for example, about my institution and the museum world at large, about the histories that we failed to tell or at least complicate. So what would it look like if we told the story of the grandness of Sir Foster Cunliffe, but we also talk about the things that we can't see? Like, for example, he took great pains to cover up how his family made their wealth. His grandfather, Sir Foster Cunliffe I, was one of the largest slavers in Liverpool, and his family made their wealth off of the slave trade. So the next couple of slides that I will show you are from our museum's collections. And I want us to explore what would it look like if we were to expand the narratives we tell in our museums and institutions. So this photo that you see is actually from our Clemens Library, which is right next door to UMA. And the title is called 1858, Egbert Gillis Handy in the Arms of Sarah, an Enslaved Woman, given to Mary Jane Purnell as a wedding gift by her father. Sarah raised all of Dr. Handy's 10 children, of whom Egbert Gillis was number 7. And Sarah remained a beloved family member of the family until her marriage late in life. So back in 2019, Emory University's Woodruff Library had a show called Portraits of Nannies. And the show looked at the portraits of caregivers of African American women and girls posed with white children of their employers. When the curator, Kimberly Wallace Sanders, reflected on the exhibition, she stated, "It is impossible to look at these portraits today without wondering what went on in the minds of the African American women and girls who were asked to sit perfectly still while lighting and props were arranged for portraits not made for them, but for the white children they held. At time when these portraits were taken, we did not know the names, and we didn't know anything about their lives outside of their labor. If these women were so important enough to be photographed or included in these photos, why don't we know who they are?" So this is a recent acquisition in this collection, and this is called Sophie Elsie. Sophie Elsie is a part of a series in which the South African artist Mary Sibande explores her family history. Sophie is kind of an avatar or an alter ego for Sibande, and so actually Sophie Elsie's face in this case is actually Sibande's face. And so she, in this series, explores herself in relation to 3 generations of the women in her family who were domestic workers. There are many different versions of Sophie. Sometimes she's dressed in blue and white, the uniform worn by domestic workers in South Africa, and other times in purple, the color that symbolized protests against the former apartheid government. Sibande created this version of Sophie, Sophie Elsie, in 2009 in honor of her great-grandmother, who was given the Western name Elsie because her masters couldn't be bothered to learn her indigenous name. While Sibande's work seeks to critique historical oppression, Sophie is a celebration. She says, "My work is not about complaining about apartheid or an invitation to feel sorry for me because I'm Black and my mothers were maids. It is about celebrating what we are as women in South Africa today. And for us to celebrate, we need to go back to see what we are celebrating. To celebrate, I need to bring this maid." I think about the fact that when we think about these moments in history, we look for larger than life people, a person who is in a position of power, socially recognized importance. But the question is, what do we lose when we focus solely on these people and not the stories of folks who labored and resisted in large and small ways? We lose history and stories when we fail to see history through the eyes of women like Sophie Elsie and like Sarah. Before I talk about this portrait, I want to start with a quote from Leydan Osman, who says, "I want to ululate for Black girls. I want to celebrate their choices, needs, and moods. I'm so tired of the beautification following their murders. I need to glorify them while they're here. I'm so tired of hashtags, of rest in peace. I want to live to see these girls as elders." This is After Monet by the artist Carrie Mae Weems. Weems focuses her lens on the blossoming flowers and the 4 little girls, one of whom the artist claims reminds her of herself. Weems reinvents an outmoded form of photography, the 19th century formal portrait, favoring soft focus, circular and oval frames, and truncated foreground spaces. The photographer places these young Black girls at the center of a narrative that explores the rights of adolescence, middle-class leisure, and tenuous ties to a European cultural past. In the 19th century drawing rooms, dark-skinned women would have never been subjects of former photography, but rather would have been subjugated as servants or objects of curiosity. The force of Weems's pictures derives from the 3 little girls unabashedly returning the photographer's and the viewer's gaze. Their expressions convey self-assurance, and they stake their rightful claim to be the central subjects in pictorial and social history. And finally, we have the work of Botswanan-born artist Maleka Makhosi, who explores the history of Pan-Africanism, the global movement to unite ethnic groups of sub-Saharan African descent. His vertical gallery installation, Pan-African Pulp, which is still up in the museum, it's up until next year, so when the museum opens, please go and see it, inaugurated a new biennial commission program at UMA. This installation features large-scale panels inspired by African photo novels from the 60s and 70s, a mural examining the complexities of Blackness, posters from Pan-African movements around the world, and including those found in Detroit and on the continent, and stories in Setswana literature. So I want us to draw our attention to the words up here. The story, which is in Setswana, which is on our website, and I suggest you go and listen to the story as it's told through several different voices, speaks to the ideas of knowledge production in English and what is worthy of academic study. In an article called The Idea of Africa, the authors reflect on the fact that African history is a fairly new topic because in the 19th and the first half of the 20th century, general European perception was that Africa, especially sub-Saharan Africa, had no history to speak of. Not only were its societies regarded as primitive and unchanging, they were believed due in part to the widespread absence of literacy to possess no collective historical conscience. Do history tales cease to exist because they're not written in English, French, Spanish, German, Dutch, or Portuguese? Oral history and oral storytelling was largely ignored and continues to largely be ignored by Western knowledge. Questions around whose knowledge we elevate and whose stories and forms of knowledge production do we prioritize? The acclaimed writer Ngozi Wathanyongo, known as one of the greatest living writers of the African continent, in the late 60s decided to stop publishing in English and primarily write in Gikuyu or Kiswahili. And I think about the existence of a work like this at a time where we have young Indigenous kids trying as hard as possible to learn the language of their ancestors and also find ways to record these languages at a time that they're quickly going extinct. In fact, during this period of COVID, we had one of the last speakers of an indigenous language in Brazil died from complications of COVID. And so I think about the histories that are now lost because of the continuous reverberations of colonialism in places like the continent, in parts of Central and South America, in Southeast and Western Asia. So I end here. And this was at the intersections of Grand River and Library at the Library Street Collective Gallery during the summer of 2019 for an Afrofuturistic expo that was curated by Ingrid Lafleur. So when I first developed this presentation, I was inspired by the work of Aisha Wormsley and her work, There Are Black People in the Future. For Wormsley, this call became an archive of information, histories, and myths that continued despite the diaspora's apocalyptic narrative. For some of the artists that you saw here, they worked across space, time, and place, using their art to insert Black people into a future in a world that implicitly and explicitly tried to make their futures non-existent or write a future for them. Because of their stories, histories, and critiques, we have the ability to create a more expansive possible world. They give us permission to world build. Now I have many thoughts on the limits of representational politics and the whole idea of representation matters, wanting us to push a little further or to think critically about how we think about representation. But I also know it's important for audiences and institutions to continue championing the work of living artists who are pushing us to critique, challenge, and engage with the world around us. So support living artists, push for more complex telling of histories, no matter how challenging or how difficult these histories are, and continue to hold institutions like ours accountable to the words, stories, and languages that we use. Thank you.
Ooh, Ozi. I want to transition to Linette, but I have this question for you as I fall more and more in love with you every time we talk. Um, you attended a conference recently where you were reminded, right, of the importance of personal stories and also the role we have as abolitionists. And I wonder if you might just take a moment to talk about how you're thinking about that. Yeah, I'd love to.
Yeah. So the what Yodit is referring to is that this past week we had the Association for American or Association for Museum Curators, some combination of those words. And our keynote speaker for the first day was Dr. Portia Moore, who is a professor at a university in Florida. And she started off her talk about storytelling, abolitionism, and dream building in museums and institutions, knowing that COVID has presented us with this new moment to build a new world. And what does it mean for our institutions to engage in this kind of work at a time that we are being called by our communities to be a lot bolder and be a lot braver in the stories that we tell? And I see this in the backdrop of the fact that we have, people questioning whether or not I think I saw something recently about lawmakers saying that the 3/5 compromise wasn't so bad, or textbooks calling enslaved Africans immigrants. Or I see this in the context of what's happening with COVID in Indigenous communities and how that legacy of forced removal led to this particular moment that Indigenous communities were ravaged by COVID, or how the Chinese Exclusionary Act, speaks to the types of attacks that are happening on our Asian and Pacific Islander siblings. And so it is important that as institutions, if we are committed to telling history, that we need to do a much better job in the ways we're telling history, because we are at a very critical moment where people are rewriting history in real time to fit whatever fantasy that they feel comfortable with. And we're not pushing people to really sit with the uncomfortable, darker, more violent parts of our history, because we need to talk about those things if we are talking about building a better world in a post-COVID society.
Yes, yes, and yes. I think there's something to be said about your roots in West Africa, as well as mine in East Africa. And one of the tools that my dad gave me that sit at the center of my abolitionist thinking and practice is the truth of who we are and where we come from. And the truth is that the birthplace of civilization happened on the very continent from which you and I's descendants derive, and that it is very intentional to transform that story as a mechanism for enslavement, for traumatizing, for colonizing, for abusing and exploiting communities of color, including Indigenous communities. So thank you for your truth telling and your truth sharing. And it does mean something to grow up in a chocolate city too. Yes,
it does. I think about how much, it wasn't until I maybe traveled to Nigeria and I thought about how much Detroit has influenced the way I grew up, or I went to school in the suburbs of Detroit. I went to school in Bloomfield Hills, and that type of how important it was for me to grow up in Detroit in a moment where I suddenly became the only one for the first time as a 14-year-old, and how that experience taught me to appreciate Detroit. And so I always run back to the city when I can, because it taught me not only to appreciate my Blackness, but the Blackness of other people, and really understand what it means to be Black wherever I go, and really root for Black people, no matter if they grew up speaking Spanish, or if they grew up on a totally different part of the world than I did, and understanding how our histories are connected in a continuum.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I would say also that we can be in the expanse of our Blackness in a city like Detroit. We don't have to neatly fit into the, narrow view of Blackness that is often the case in non-majority communities. Again, thank you. And speaking of growing up in Metro Detroit, I'm excited to bring our next speaker, Linette Lao, to the speaker stage. Linette.
Hi, thank you. I'm going to share my screen. Let's see. So I want to start by taking a look at this quote with you. It's a quote that I have loved the first part of this, this idea of my delicious dilemma is language. And I'm really drawn to the idea of that struggle is important, and that there's like love combined with struggle results in the best inventions. And so poet Wanda Coleman put this so beautifully. This really sums up and puts in context that I haven't had before, everything that I care about with my work. I love the idea of invention here. And this term, the fiction of history, is so important. This idea that, it's only through our imaginations that we can understand history. History is not facts, right? And then it all results in the shaping of us, of me, right? So in thinking about the theme of this being space, place, and belonging, on the surface, I realized that underneath my surface appreciation of and love of the word belonging, I had a little bit of unease. And that, being a lover of struggle, I wanted to lean into that and figure out, what is it? And I think it's that as we discuss belonging, you also have, bring into the negative space of like, where do we not belong? And I started by thinking about, who, I have not grown up in a place where I've seen myself reflected. In college, I didn't even have any women art professors, much less people of color. In just many, many ways, I just have an empty expanse in terms of seeing myself in the world. So I wanted to look at who do I literally belong to, which starts with my ancestors. This is a school photo of my great uncle Johnny. And if you can spot him, he's the Asian kid in the front row. This is at PS 89 in Harlem in 1924. And, Ozi and Yodit, as you were speaking about a chocolate city, I realized my grandpa and his 7 siblings grew up in a chocolate city. They were part of Harlem before the Black Renaissance there. And they were part of the Harlem Renaissance. My great-grandfather had a restaurant. He was an immigrant from China in the early part of the 1900s. He had a restaurant right down the street from all of the theaters. So I like to imagine, again, like my imagination of history is that all the important creatives of the Harlem Renaissance knew them and ate there. And I feel pretty sure it's true, though I have no evidence at all. So as I look at this picture and see, one Asian kid, my great uncle, my grandfather's little brother, I know that they were deeply rooted in this community. I know that they were part of things here. And at the same time, I wonder, is there a sense of belonging, or could there be a sense of belonging? On one hand, my grandpa and all his siblings were New Yorkers and really identified as New Yorkers. I can hear my grandfather's voice in my head right now, and he's just the sound of a New Yorker old man. So I know that he had those connections. At the same time, he's the only kid here whose parents were immigrants from China. And so this kind of picture of being the only Asian or Chinese kid in a classroom is one that repeats throughout my family history. Like the next generation after this would be my mother, who came to live in Livonia in the 50s. And while I didn't uncover census data for Livonia in the 50s, around 2000, it was 98% white. And their racism is extremely well documented in the form of withdrawal of federal funds when they wouldn't make affordable housing in their city because it would integrate the city more. And even last year was 90% white. So what it was like in the 50s, my mom has lots of school pictures where she's the only Asian. And then for me, growing up in the 70s and 80s in Canton, which was working class and very white at the time, I was often pretty much almost always in the early days of Canton, the only Asian person. So I did not have a community. I had my family, and I find that those kinds of family and being Chinese are all entwined. And I'm still, now that I'm an adult and have more Asian friends, and through reading and accessing history, I'm only now understanding what was just my family and what was cultural. So out of this has given me a keen sense of outsider insight. So I like to think about the negative spaces and the places that are a little bit raw around the edges, like where there's difficulty. And that's the site of a lot of my work and what I really care about. So I put this little reminder in the corner because I want to introduce the next slide before I show it to you. And once I see it, I forget to introduce what I'm talking about. So Ipsy on My Mind is a poetry collection that's coming out later this month. And it's from a collective of writers who are women of color and in Washtenaw County. And so periodically I'll have a poetry assignment from the Untold Stories friends. So that was the case right around the beginning of April when I knew I was going to write a poem, and that is kind of my favorite way to have to write a poem, is that pressure. And also on my mind would be the violence against Asians that happened with increasing frequency, but the ones that gained media coverage in January, February, and then the shootings in March in Atlanta. So I wanted to think about Ypsilanti and wonder, where were the Asians? And we're about 3% right now in Ypsilanti, which is a place that is my home, and it is like so deep in my heart. But I have never really considered, where are the Asians and where have they been? And I remembered a picture, which is this one. And really the only evidence I've had of there being an Asian presence in Ypsilanti at this time. It's from 1893, and it was exactly around April 12th that my poem was due that I was looking at this. So I felt a real connection because of the time. And this picture shows the damage from the Ypsilanti cyclone. which went through town and destroyed some buildings. It didn't kill anybody, but it felt very random in the buildings that it took down. And this was the Chinese laundry. And at the time, almost every town had a Chinese laundry, because if you were Chinese, you couldn't have any job you wanted, no matter where your skills or experience lay. Having a laundry was low startup costs, and it was work nobody wanted to do. So you just had to get yourself to a town basically and set up. Looking at this photo of utter destruction and the randomness of it, with like leaving the house to the left is fine, the right of the building is fine, all the houses on the block were fine. It really resonated with me to think about the pain that this picture shows, like the suddenness of it and the violence of it too. And I wanted to learn more about these people there were only 5 Asians, these 5 Chinese men in the town of Ypsilanti at the time too. In my research, I found this article from the Detroit Free Press in 1933. So this is 40 years later, and it's this old timer named Tom McAndrew, who's about 81 years old at the time. And he's actually the son of the first woman doctor in Michigan, who was a big part of Ypsilanti, who was also part of the Underground Railroad in Ypsilanti. So I had to remind myself that in 1933, everything was racist. Because when I found this statement, I felt so taken aback by it. Like the idea of the loss of somebody's whole livelihood being kind of part of this tall tale, right? Like it's paired with this kind of cartoony idea of somebody's whiskers getting hit by the paint during the cyclone. And while I couldn't find any evidence of the people who worked in the laundry's voice, like here I found this caricature where they're called the Chinaman who ran the laundry. So somebody who's nameless, whose voice is like articulated in the most stereotypical cartoony kind of way, when it was certainly like a devastating situation of pain and disaster. And in my studies, I did find out that the man who owned the laundry's name was Hing Lee, and that his family probably came from the same area that my great-grandfather came from, because the Chinese immigrating at that time all came from a certain part of China. So I was able to find a connection that extended like through time. This is my neighborhood. Trevor, I know you're in the audience. This is the site of the Riverside Arts Center. So it's the place that really has meant a lot to me. And I was really excited to find this, to uncover this secret history, really. And I did write my poem, and none of these facts are in it, but it was really part of the process of getting into this. And it is about the laundry, but it is not factual. Here's another project that I wanted to tell you about. This woman was born in Ypsilanti in 1920, and she's the person who mapped the bottom of the ocean. And she was the first person to find out that the bottom of the ocean is mountains made by underwater volcanoes. Up until the late 40s, people thought it was flat, like a swimming pool or something. So in uncovering and celebrating these people who nobody really knows her name, you know, her work hangs in the Library of Congress, but people on the street in Ypsilanti don't know who she is. And as a woman in science, you know, her work was co-opted, and, you know, she encountered lots of struggles of her own. So this is from PopX. It's an exhibit and it's a collaboration with Kim DeBoard, Alita Warren, and Laura M. Tower. But can we celebrate, find, uncover, and lift up these people who otherwise might slide into the nothingness that isn't even part of the history that we remember. And then this is the last project I want to show you. This is an installation that Kim DeBoard and I volunteered to do for the Workforce Pipeline Summit, which was put on by the Ann Arbor Area Chamber of Commerce. And this was a summit bringing together education and industry, really addressing the economic disparity that Yodit mentioned earlier in Washtenaw County. The words workforce pipeline just seems so dehumanizing. And like the people were the stuff, were like sludge in the pipeline moving from one place to the next for the purpose of the economy. And that's not at all what the experience of this summit was like, but just the words themselves of workforce pipeline, which is not something that they invented. We really wanted to create something that would draw attention to life, like to human lives, and to the idea that like these pipelines or work might exist to support life in individuals. And just to remind us of like what workforce pipelines really are and what they're for. So there was this little bit of writing on the right was on a little bit of paper, and we tucked it up inside of each of these pipes that could be used as vases too. And I'm going to stop there. Thank you so much. Oh, here's my mouse.
Thank you, Linette. I know that you've got to go be a teacher, which you're very good at, including today. So I want to invite possibly your fellow conversationalists a little bit into what you offered. Is there anything that might resonate there? There was something you said before that I'll use as maybe a spark, and we really only have a couple minutes. So I want to make sure that we can get into it. But first of all, thank you for pushing back on, or at least inviting us to be more expansive in this notion of belonging. And something else that you mentioned was that we didn't have the word Asian until we needed it to establish political voice. So I'm wondering, like Ozi or Deanna, as you reflect upon what Linette shared, and also this idea of belonging, and sometimes that belonging being tied to a broader agenda, if there's anything that comes up for y'all.
I can just share some resonance that was happening for me as Linette was talking in terms of, I have a similar story in some ways of being the only one within an environment. And I really appreciated this sort of, Linette, you said about the outsider looking in, or I just really resonated with sort of the perspective of someone who's living in this bicultural context and beginning to see, there's things you can see that other folks can't see from that perspective. And I was just really touched by that, really related to it. And also waking up like, in my life, a lot of my dearest and closest friends have been first generation young people coming from various backgrounds in different places in different countries, because there was something about their perspective that I shared as a Black woman growing up and desegregating a white community. So I really appreciated that story, the personal story, and it really resonated with me.
Fantastic. Ozi, anything, or Linette?
Yeah. With me as well. When I reflect back to my experiences as a high schooler and the feelings of being the only one, like that being like my very first feelings of being the only one, and being really, I think, angry about being like the outsider, or the term that I saw was being treated like a house guest in your own house, and feeling invisibilized or hyper visible in certain spaces. And I think it was college and meeting some of my friends that they were kind of like, kind of reject the need to be on the inside, or to need to be belong. What if we worked on the margins? Because the people on the margins are doing the most expansive work, the most progressive work, the things that are actually pushing us to change. So what if we just don't worry about them and worry about what's happening on the outside? Like, it's okay to be about on that side, or to think about belonging in those ways. Like, there are a community of outsiders together. And so
Yes.
that's also what I'm reflecting on.
That was really powerful. And Linette, I'll give you perhaps a final word, both to share anything that's bubbling up in response to that. And also, each of you have been invited to share your invitations or demands of our community. Linette, if you want to put something forth before you have to transition, that'd be great.
Yeah, I guess one of the things that I really love is this idea of a community of outsiders. And I think that like that's what I have looked for and found in Ypsilanti. And then as far as my demand request, I think, you know, everybody should make things, and that's a way to bring together like where you belong and where you don't belong. And it's through this kind of invention that those like margins and expansions happen. So I would urge people to participate in that, whatever way that happens for you. And I'm going to hang out till 1:15, so I'm excited to stay here a little bit longer. Thank you.
I am too.
Everyone.
Linette, thank you. Thanks for gifting us with that, with so much today. And Deanna, I'm going to quickly I'm going to share with our group. We're going till 1:30 today. We've got an interactive exercise in a little bit that Deanna's going to lead us in. It was very important to us, and so we hope that you'll stay. And Deanna, I'd like to ask if you would both bring yourself into this space. I'm so glad that you're here, and also then right away just move us into that practice. Okay, thank you.
Sure, no problem. So hello, I'm going to share my screen as well. Can everyone see that? Great. So I will also start with my personal story. My family desegregated a white community in rural Virginia where I was raised. And, you know, this is in the wake of Jim Crow, right? This is almost 10 years after Jim Crow had been ended, but not much was different. You know, there was a lot of hostility being directed at my family, myself, by individuals in the community. But there was also a systemic oppression that my father made me aware of and drilled into my head every time we drove by this courthouse. This is the Stafford County Courthouse where I grew up. It's the biggest, most expensive building in my entire community. And when we went back, my father's like, you don't ever want to find yourself in this building. You don't ever want to find yourself touching this system because it's not fair to Black people. So I would cringe, right? Every time we went by this building, I was scared of the building, right? Scared of the architecture. And ironically, what I did to sort of comfort myself as a little girl was I would build spaces of refuge, right? I'd build these little huts in the forest or in the house. And I would go there and I would just go there just to be at peace, right? From all of this aggression and oppression. And so it's not a surprise, given that making stuff like making shelters for myself was my primary coping mechanism. I went on to become an architect. It was obviously my calling. And I ended up just needing to get out of the country. Like, I just have to leave this place. And I traveled all over the world as an architect. And it was very fortunate. I was working with some of the wealthiest developers in the world in the Middle East and Australasia, in China, all over Europe. I traveled through South America. I was, working in different cultural contexts, making these huge things, shopping centers, mixed use developments. But at the same time, I was seeing this. I was seeing incredible structural inequity in the built environment, the way that people were living. People working on my jobs, right? In Dubai, were living in hovels, right? Building the stuff that I was designing. And then coming back to the US and seeing how Native American communities were living. And I had to really ask some serious questions of what the hell am I doing? Why am I doing this, right? If the built environment impacts how we feel, how we organize, how we belong to one another, I don't know if I can keep doing what I'm doing. And I quit. I just quit. I quit in 2011 with no money. I had no savings. I had no business plan. And not only that, I went into the thing my father said, never go near this stuff, right? Never touch it. And I decided when I returned to the country that what I wanted to do was use the gift that I had been given and the passion I had for the built environment to end this system of mass incarceration. And people were like, well, what are you going to do about that? You're an architect. Why does it matter? And I think there's no better place for us to understand that the things that we believe, the things that we value, they get manifested, right? They get manifested in bricks, in mortar, in concrete, and they last for sometimes centuries, right? They last a long time, and they anchor and foment those beliefs. So believe in punishment, we build punishment. Right? If we believe that Black and brown folks are less than, we do this to them. And it amplifies and ricochets forever, right? So it's hard for us to change when we actually build it, and it's all around us. And so I started to think, well, if we don't do this, what do we do instead? What do we build instead of this stuff? Restorative justice became a huge anchor for me and an inspiration for me. And we at DJDS are abolitionists. I became an abolitionist, and that the prettier versions of those things were not what we had to do, right? We had to come up with completely new infrastructure based on a different set of values. And that if we wanted to unbuild racism, where it starts is with igniting our radical imagination that we have. And we're going to do some of this today. So I'm glad we'll flow into a creative, radical imagination exercise. But this is the way we work, right? That if people can use creative practice and tools, it opens up their minds into this kind of elastic thinking. We can come up with new ideas and new things that we've never seen before. And so as we started to work with folks around the country around this idea of building for restorative justice, unbuilding racism, several things, and ending mass incarceration, several types of projects and prototypes started to emerge. And I'll show you just a few. If we want people to come home, if we want to have mass decarceration, we have to build for that. So some of what we're starting to think about is how do we create and work with incarcerated people, their communities are here to develop infrastructure for reentry coming home. This is a mobile refuge for women released from jail in the middle of the night. It supports survivors of sex trafficking, and right now it's supporting unhoused women. We also know that if everyone's coming home, what's left? This stuff is left. We have hundreds and hundreds of these pieces of infrastructure that we built, the jails, the prisons, the courthouses, and we're starting to work with communities to reimagine this. Like imagine a jail like this that's turned into a center for equity, right? A place where the community can come together, with daycare. We start to strip back, either demolish or rethink how these spaces work, right? How can a space of incarceration filled with cells and Black and brown bodies actually become a place for us to be together, right? And this is happening, and we are working to do this all over the country. And then I would just say the last piece, right, which is the most important piece for us, is that to take from this investment in punishment and bring it into the communities most harmed and create restorative reinvestments. And so some of that we've been doing. Restore Oakland was one we did here locally, where we worked with a group of nonprofits to create the country's first Center for Restorative Justice and Restorative Economics. This is an old building, we gutted it, and we turned it into a restaurant that trains low-wage restaurant workers to get living wage jobs and fine dining. It's got community organizing space for a whole constellation of nonprofits, right? Beautiful, airy space. They own it, right? They own this building. And it has the first dedicated spaces for restorative justice. So like young people are coming, not being sent to court, and they're coming here to work through a peacemaking practice. And this is used not just with young people, but with the community and with the people inside, right? So how do we foment new ways of being together, co-locating folks in the same place, so that we can foment and anchor a different set of values, right? A different vision. What was kind of cool is that while we were building these buildings, right, doing stuff, we were also building mobile infrastructure, pop-up infrastructure, right? You know, sometimes you just got to do something light and quick, all right? So our pop-up village is our pop-up to permanent strategy, where we're bringing constellation of resources to activate sites and community, bring access to resources, support micro-entrepreneurs, right? So that people can come together in a place and create some community cohesion. And this project has been very successful, and we're going to be doing some more pop-up to permanent not far from you all. So we'll share more about that. That project ignited, Restore Oakland, Pop-Up Village ignited our work in Detroit. We've been coming to Detroit for 5 years, and the Love Building and campus is really how we got introduced in a way to Yodit as well, and the work that Nu is doing. So you can sort of see these two, but I love before and afters. So, you know, this is what's happening now, right? We have the Love Building, for those of you who know it, on Grand River in the Core City neighborhood. We started to work with Allied Media Projects, Detroit Justice Center, Detroit Disability Power, Detroit Narrative Agency, Mama Neza, like amazing groups, right? They purchased this building, we helped them reimagine it, start to raise money to be able to do it. This project's under construction. And what you can see is, like, when you build new things, right? When you imagine something new, it starts to amplify and ricochet, right? So Restore Oakland wasn't even done before we got a call from these folks, like, we're gonna do 1 too, right? Now, Yodi's going to do a different one, but it's right. There's just, we are amplifying a new vision for justice in this way. And what we're going to also do now, it's like, y'all, there's not enough of this stuff, right? So before we finish this project, people were like, well, we don't have enough space here. We need more things, right? So we are like, okay, well, we're going to get more land, and we're going to make a whole Love campus, right? So the Love Building is catalyzing a beautiful new vision that we're working with the community to evolve, with everything from an arts and culture anchor, possibly Detroit cinema. We're going to have youth spaces there. We're going to look at alternative justice spaces. We're definitely putting in a restorative justice space, y'all. It's going to be there. And it's emerging, right? As we start to constellate this amazing community with a food ecosystem, et cetera. And then, you know, the way that we have to democratize, right, the built environment is, we got to teach everybody about how it happens. We got to teach everybody about design and real estate. And we are working with local community members. This is Anthony Marjan. Anthony's from the Core City neighborhood. He was incarcerated for a good part of his life. And he is our designer on deck, our lead designer on deck. This is a new way we're working, where we are training community members in what we know so that they can lead this sort of community engagement and radical imagination on the ground. And in a way, I think that's also our call to action and request, right? We need designers on deck. You know, do you want to be a designer on deck? How can you participate in sort of democratizing the built environment, helping people understand how it happens? Because, you know, we're not the experts in Core City. We're not the experts in Ypsilanti. We're not the experts there. You all are the experts in your own communities, and you need to lead the transformation. So I end with a different vision for justice, right? Like, what if justice is about love, right? What if justice is actually about caring and repair rather than tearing down and punishing? What does that justice look like? And so that's my call to y'all, is to help me imagine what that is.
Well, I said we would have to flow right in, but can I just acknowledge what your voice and your presence and your imagination, what it does for my spirit, Deanna, and how important it is that your daddy loved you so much that he not only inspired your protection and safety, but your vision and your call to help us reimagine place and space. And how that's reverberating. I don't know if you'll see the chat later, but folks are just feeling you, sis, just feeling you. do you or Ozi, before we move into our practice together, our designing together, our designers on deck session, any more that either of you want to share in the way of kind of demands or invitations? And then I want to say to our audience, time is a construct. We said we would end at 1:30, it's 1:16, and I don't want to rush. So I want you to get as much as you can done, Deanna, in the next 15 minutes, but also I want to invite people to stay with us a little bit beyond, if that's helpful. And Ananya, I just, that's me exercising my executive powers. But let me hear briefly from you all, just reflections and whether or not there are invitations or demands before we transition to our practice activity.
So I just wanted to say a couple of things. So one thing I wanted to say, because it was mentioned in the chat around like the folks wanting to be architects and wondering if it's too late. I want to say that it's never too late. If the things that have been said today has like stirred something in you to like move in a different direction, know that it's not too late. I think what I've learned from COVID is that the possibilities are there. We like COVID maybe has allowed us to think beyond the limits of what we've been told. So just wanting to say that like affirm the folks in the chat who were saying that. With Deanna's work, I've been a fan since I lived in California. I was first exposed to design justice when I lived in Canada, and I saw you all at the Empowering Women of Color conference at Berkeley. And I've been thinking about so much about how the physical structures add to the oppression of our society and the people who live in our communities and the further marginalized our community members. A conversation that I had with a friend on Sunday about South Africa and the kind of the really violent fence in the suburbs of places like Johannesburg that went up after apartheid. Like if you see these fences, they're like these metal coils that also electrocute people if you try to jump over them, and the real like violence that goes into the structures that we live in. And then I think of places like Constitution Hill, that was formerly a prison that held folks like Nelson and Winnie Mandela and Albertina Sissoyu, and a place like Robben Island, which like is purposely far away from humanity, and the ways in which our structures seek to harm and replicate violence. And so just affirming that your work is so important as we think of how we build new worlds. I think my final thing that I wanted to say in general is as a budding curator, I wouldn't have been able to do the work that I'm doing without historians, other educators. And so I ask that you continue to support teachers, educators, historians who are doing really important work at a time where people are arguing that critical race theory is going to lead the destruction of this country, or is telling us that folks like Kimberly Crenshaw and intersectionality is going to destroy this country, or folks who have large platforms who have never heard of folks like Jimmy Boggs or Grace Lee Boggs or W.E.B. Du Bois or Patricia Hill Collins, all these people who are suddenly having the microphones to destroy how we think about history. I would say, please continue to support these people who are doing really critical work at this moment, and be comfortable with being uncomfortable, because these histories are violent and we're never going to actually unbuild legacies of racism until we actually are confronting.
All right, Deanna. Thank you, Ozi.
Great. Thank you. Thank you, Ozi. Ozi listed one of my primary examples of building and unbuilding of new worlds. So thanks for that. So I would love, we'd love to do some radical imagination with you right now. And I'm going to do a visualization. So we're going to need to go from a little bit of this outside space to an inside space. So I'm going to invite you right now to close your eyes. You can also leave them open. It's an invitation. I want you to make yourselves comfortable in your seats and feel the part of your body that's touching the ground, connect with the earth, feel your butts on your seats. And just take a deep breath with me for like 3 seconds. Just breathe in together collectively. 1, 2, 3. And then release. If you'd like, make a nice big sound with it. And just one more breath, and 3-second breath. And I want you to, as you exhale, I want you to imagine that you're leaving your home, right? You're leaving your place to go to another place, a third space where you have a deep sense of belonging, right? This is a place that you belong. You know you belong here, right? You feel affirmed here. You're going to spend a few precious hours of your day here. And this could be a space that already exists, or you can imagine one unique to you. But as you feel into this scenario, first you're like, how did you get here? How are you getting there? Are you walking? You get in your car? You get in a bus? How are you getting to this place? And when you arrive there, where are you? Right? Are you inside? Is it an outside space? How do you enter this space of belonging? Is it through a gateway or a garden? Is there a big door? Feel yourself moving through and into this space of belonging. And when you step inside, feel in your body, how are you feeling being here? Right? Do you feel excited? Feel calm? Are you anxious? Is there someone there to greet you? Right? Are you being welcomed? How are you being welcomed? What is the very first thing you see? Like what's there? What's happening here? Are people resting? Are they working? Are they playing? Are they eating? Look around the space. What are the dimensions? Are the ceilings soaring high? Is it a big space? Is it intimate and cozy? Is it a little bit of both? What kind of volume are you in? Who's there with you, right? Are there families here? Are there elders? Are there youth? Who are you in community with in your space of belonging? Look around. Do you see natural features in the space? Are there plants? Right? Do you have views to the mountains or to water or to gardens? Are there water features inside? Like what way is nature playing a role in your space of belonging? Are there objects of comfort in the space? Blankets or pillows or animals, right? Faith artifacts, right? What things are you seeing on the walls, on the tables, the floors? Listen. What are you hearing in the space? Is there wind blowing? Is the sound of water trickling in the background? Is there music? You hear voices talking? Is there traffic? Is it totally quiet and peaceful? If you reach out your hands and touch, or touch with any part of your senses, what materials and textures are there? Right? Do you feel textured soft? Are they smooth? Is it clean? Right? Is it glassy? Breathe in, right? Breathe in. What scents or aromas are in the space? Do you smell coffee or bread baking or flowers or fresh cut grass? As you open your eyes and look, are there colors in the space, right? Are they soft and muted? Are they vibrant? Do you see art on the wall? Mobiles hanging from the ceiling? What kind of art is in this place? What does it look like? Do you see yourself affirmed and mirrored in this? What kind of lighting is there? Right? Is it soft domestic lighting? Do you turn a lamp on? Is there sun streaming through the windows? Is it candlelit? Right? What kind of lighting is penetrating your place? Now take all of that in, right? Those sights, those smells, the sounds, the people, and I want to invite you to return, but with that images in mind, and draw, if you like, or share a picture or an image of what your space looked like, or just an element of the space, right? It doesn't really matter whether you can draw well or whether you're a great photographer, but I invite you to represent what you saw in your place of belonging. And I have to, I've tried to remember what Ananya and Yodi told me in terms of sharing it, because we want to see it, right? I don't know if I love when people want to share. This is like my favorite part. What did you see, right? What does your space of belonging look and feel and smell and taste like? It's juicy, right?
It's
We'll
okay
put
if
a
we
link.
can't draw, right? Oh, go ahead, Ananya.
Yeah, so we'll put a link in the chat, and when you have done your drawing, and if you would like to share it, you could take a picture of it and post it at the place where we will tell you.
And I always invite folks to use images that you might have of a place. Like, you don't have to draw, right? You can also write something too. Some of us are great writers. I'm not, so I don't usually write. I like to draw, but any way that you want to represent it, it's
music and stories worth staying up for.
Okay, so just as the song is trickling to an end, we're going to invite you to keep drawing and keep writing. And we're also, if you would like to stay with us, I'm happy to be here and just keep playing some music. And we would love for you, whenever you are ready, to please share the drawings or share whatever is coming out for you in this space at that link that we've just shared. And we also just want to give folks a chance to transition away if you need to. So thank you so much to each of our speakers for being here today. Thank you, Deanna, and thank you, Ozi, and thank you, Linette. And thank you, Yodit, for really being the water that allowed this session to flow so beautifully today. So thank you, everyone. And as always, we would appreciate your feedback on this session. So I'm also going to throw in a little survey link to please complete before you go. Thank you, everyone.
I love that people are